Welcome to today's Explainer. I am thrilled to have you here because we're about to unlock the true mechanics of business profitability. We're going to pull back the curtain on how firms actually operate, breaking down everything from the hidden anatomy of costs to the alphabet soup of revenue. If you've ever wanted to look at a business's financials with the rigorous eye of an economist, you are in exactly the right place.
Hey, before we get into the formulas, I gotta ask you something fundamental. Is a business truly profitable, or is it just an accounting illusion? Most folks look at the money coming in, subtract the money going out, and call whatever is left the profit. But as we're about to see, that intuitive definition totally misses half the story. If you aren't calculating what you've actually given up to run that business, you might not be making a profit at all.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The hidden costs of business. 2. Private versus social costs. 3. Fixed and variable factors. 4. Navigating short-run cost curves. And 5. Introduction to firm revenue.
All right, Section 1. The hidden costs of business.
Think of a firm's costs like a giant iceberg. Above the water, you've got the tip. Those are your explicit costs, the actual cash paid out to run the show, the accounting cost. But right below the surface, there's this massive hidden chunk of ice. Those are your implicit costs. These are the estimated values of inputs the firm already owns and uses. It's what those resources could have earned doing literally anything else.
So, when you add both the visible tip and that massive hidden chunk together, you get the true economic cost. If you're thinking like an economist, you absolutely have to account for the total sacrifices made, not just the cash leaving the bank. Ignoring the opportunity cost of the entrepreneur's own time, capital, and resources, that's a huge mistake. Economic cost is the sum total of both explicit and implicit costs.
To break that down a bit more, explicit costs are the literal checks you write. We're talking wages, raw materials, power bills, rent on your buildings, interest on loans, the whole shebang. Implicit costs, though, no checks are written, but the sacrifice is 100% real. It's using your own building instead of renting it out. It's investing your own cash instead of earning interest at the bank. And yeah, it's the founder's own managerial time, which could definitely be earning a sweet salary somewhere else.
Which brings us to a really fun twist that usually surprises people: normal profit. In economics, normal profit is actually treated as a cost. Yep, specifically an implicit cost. Basically, it's the bare minimum a producer has to receive to even bother taking on the risk of production. Think of it as the required salary the entrepreneurs simply must pay themselves to stay in the game rather than jumping ship to their next best alternative. If a firm isn't making at least a normal profit, it's not going to stay open.
Moving right along to Section 2, private versus social costs.
Every business operates in the real world, right? Costs aren't just isolated to the factory floor. We have to draw a line between private cost and social cost. Private cost is just the burden taken on by the firm itself. That's exactly the economic cost we were just talking about. But social cost? That is the total cost society as a whole has to bear because that commodity is being produced. And the gap between those two boils down to external costs. Basically, social cost equals private cost plus external cost. An external cost is a burden dumped on third parties who have nothing to do with the firm's private calculus. Say an oil refinery pollutes a river, or a factory pumps out thick smoke that messes with the local community's health. Those are massive external costs. The social cost differs from the private cost exactly by the amount of those negative externalities.
Section 3. Fixed and variable factors. Let's see how this builds our baseline rules for when production actually kicks off in the short run. Firms deal with two main types of inputs. First up, fixed factors. Things you can't just easily change overnight, like heavy machinery or the factory building itself. The costs tied to these are your total fixed costs. Your overhead, you pay them whether you crank out 1,000,000 units or absolutely zero. Second, you have variable factors. Things you can scale up and down easily, like raw materials and hourly labor. Their usage rises and falls with your level of output, creating your total variable costs.
Put those two together and you've got your foundational formula for production. Total cost simply equals total fixed cost plus total variable cost. It's just the sum of your unavoidable overhead and your output-dependent prime costs. Simple as that.
Which naturally leads us to Section 4, navigating short-run cost curves.
Picture a perfectly flat, horizontal line on a graph. That is your total fixed cost. It doesn't budge no matter how much you produce. Now imagine a total variable cost curve starting at 0 and climbing upward as output grows. The really cool part, your total cost curve perfectly mirrors the shape of that variable cost curve. It just starts higher up. Why? Because it originates precisely from that exact spot on the axis where your fixed costs kick in. Now, what happens when we look at average or per unit costs? Your average fixed cost is constantly falling as you produce more, because you're spreading that flat overhead across more and more units. It gets super close to the axis but never actually touches it. Meanwhile, your average total cost and average variable cost start out pretty far apart, but they squeeze tighter and tighter together as production scales. That happens because the fixed cost portion becomes a smaller and smaller slice of the total pie.
So the crucial point here is understanding why those average cost curves eventually stop falling and start climbing back up, creating this very distinct U-shape. At first, when you add variable things like labor to your fixed factory floor, your per unit costs drop. But eventually, you overcrowd the factory, efficiency completely tanks, and per unit costs spike back up. This behavior is driven by a core economic principle known as the law of variable proportions.
And here is the absolute climax of cost curves, marginal cost. That's the cost of producing just one more unit. When marginal cost is below average cost, it drags the overall average down. When it's above, it pulls the average up. So purely by mathematical rule, the marginal cost curve must always cut straight through the average cost curve exactly at its absolute lowest point, coming from below. It really is a beautiful piece of economic logic.
Finally, Section 5, Introduction to Firm Revenue.
Okay, let's cleanly decode the alphabet soup of revenue formulas. Total revenue, or TR, is simply price multiplied by quantity. But check out average revenue, or AR. If you take total revenue and divide it by quantity, you just get the price back. Mathematically, average revenue is always exactly equal to price. And marginal revenue, MR, is the extra cash from selling one additional unit. Now let's take a breath and apply this to a specific market scenario: perfect competition. Under perfect competition, a firm is a strict price taker. It literally doesn't need to lower its price to sell more output. This gives us what's known as the constant price rule. Say we're looking at a textbook numerical schedule, where the price is locked flat at 15 rupees. Whether you sell 1 unit, 2 units, all the way up to 5 units of output, the price remains firmly at 15. Because the price never changes, every single extra unit sold brings in exactly 15 rupees. Therefore, your average revenue and your marginal revenue completely coincide, meaning AR equals MR, which equals price, at all possible output levels.
Let's bring this entire explainer together. We've seen how explicit and implicit cost inputs merge to create total cost, but let's juxtapose that with the predictable anatomy of revenue. Think back to that perfect competition scenario with the constant price of 15 rupees. If we graph the AR and MR curves, they'd form a single horizontal straight line perfectly parallel to the x-axis at that ruling price level. They are the exact same line. And what about total revenue in this perfectly competitive market? Because the price and the marginal revenue are completely fixed, total revenue increases in direct proportion to output at a completely steady rate. Visually, the TR curve tracks as a straight line shooting directly out from the origin with a constant upward slope. It is a predictable, flawless machine of revenue generation, beautifully balancing out those U-shaped complexities of cost we explored earlier.
Which brings us right back to our starting point. Now that you know about the hidden iceberg of implicit costs, the impact of the law of variable proportions, and the strict mechanics of revenue, when you analyze a business now, are you calculating true economic reality or just falling for an accounting illusion? I highly encourage you to take this rigorous framework out into the real world. I guarantee you'll never look at a profit margin the exact same way again. Thanks for hanging out and exploring this with me.